This video was inspired by Matty Crescent Moon's The MCU is Not Dead video.
Oh, I'm unbeatable.
What's going on, you guys? It's your boy SoDoom285 and welcome back to another video essay. Now, ever since the release of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania and Shazam! Fury of the Gods, two superhero movies I personally love but everyone else seems to hate, a lot of people have begun to believe that superhero movies are dying or losing their relevance in pop culture or becoming uninspiring and unoriginal. Sure, there have been a couple of superhero movies that have been critically acclaimed, such as Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, but a lot of people consider them the exceptions. In fact, a lot of people seem to have been acting as if we've gotten more bad superhero movies than good ones since 2021, a year after COVID started. However, I personally don't think superhero movies are dying. Now, this might be because I consider myself 10 times more tolerant than most people on Earth, but I do also have some reasons why superhero movies are not dying, as well as evidence to back it up, and why I'm still enjoying them. Okay then, so first I'm going to discuss how fans are demanding more stuff from superhero films. In particular, they're demanding more serious or R-rated superhero films. I can't help but notice that a lot of fans, and I mean a lot, have been demanding for more serious superhero movies, or even for more R-rated superhero movies, saying some of these movies would have benefited from, or been better with, an R rating. And I respectfully disagree. I don't think R-rated movies are necessary for a movie to be good. If directors want their movies to have an older rating than PG-13, that's completely fine. But the rating of a movie doesn't, nor should it, decide the quality of a movie for me. Take Thor: Love and Thunder, for example. Contrary to a lot of people, I love this movie, but a lot of people hate it. The biggest complaint I hear towards this movie is that it didn't take itself too seriously. Now, while the humor of Love and Thunder might be more out there than in Ragnarok, I think some people over-exaggerate how bad the jokes are or even misrepresent the film. I personally enjoyed practically every joke, and I didn't feel the jokes undermined the dramatic moments. The way I look at this film is that the characters are overly comedic to hide the amount of grief and sadness they're feeling inside. But I also think people wanted Thor: Love and Thunder, as well as other superhero movies, to be darker or more serious because it came out the same year as The Batman. Now, I love The Batman. It's my favorite Batman movie to date, and Robert Pattinson is my favorite Batman of all time, with Zoe Kravitz being my favorite Catwoman. But I don't love it because it was serious or dark. No, I love it because I found the story engaging, the characters compelling, and I was emotionally invested in Batman and his arc in the movie, and I thought Robert Pattinson gave a fantastic performance in the film. Same thing with Love and Thunder. I was invested in the story and characters and their journey. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I like diversity in my movies, shows, and comics in terms of tone, as long as the characters are compelling and I can care about them, and I care about what they're going through in their stories. And regarding R-rated movies, only in the last 6 to 7 years people started caring about them, and that's because of Deadpool 1 and Logan. However, it was only when these movies came out people started saying they wanted more R-rated superhero movies. R-rated superhero movies have existed since at least 1989, 12 years before I was born. And I don't love Deadpool 1 and 2 and Logan because they're R-rated and have some brutality and gore. No, I love them so much because they have a lot of heart, emotional moments, compelling characters that you want to spend time with, and the stories of all three of the aforementioned movies were engaging. Some people have said that Thor: Love and Thunder should have been rated R so that the villain, Gorr the God Butcher, could have been able to butcher more gods. But I think these people ignore the fact that this is a Thor movie, not a Gorr the God Butcher movie. The focus was on Thor and his journey in the film first and foremost. Besides, if some of you hate Love and Thunder so much, do you really think that you would have suddenly loved this film if it was, hypothetically speaking, R-rated but still had the exact same script? And now I'm going to discuss the fact that it seems like fans are becoming more inconsistent with their standards. A good example of this would be Black Widow, another movie I love but everyone else seems to hate. Possibly the most common criticism I've seen against this film is, for a movie that's relatively grounded, it gets big and cartoonish like a PS4 cutscene in the third act. But here's the thing, this isn't the first superhero movie that is relatively grounded but gets big and cartoonish like a PS4 cutscene in its third act. Captain America: The Winter Soldier, which is a lot of people's favorite MCU movie, was also a relatively grounded movie that had a pretty similar third act to Black Widow, where it gets pretty big and cartoonish like a PS4 cutscene. Now, this is not a criticism I hold against The Winter Soldier, but it's also not a criticism I hold against Black Widow. I still like both movies as third acts and believe they both still have great emotional moments in them. This is an example of me doing my best at being consistent with my standards. Unfortunately, it seems like others are not being consistent with theirs. The worst defense I've heard for why one likes the third act of The Winter Soldier but not that of Black Widow is, come, Black Widow is stuff I've seen before, Winter Soldier's still perfect, which is, in my opinion, a lazy, poor, and unfair excuse. I can absolutely tolerate people with differing opinions from me, but I don't think I can tolerate inconsistent standards. And that leads me to my point about people seeming to be tired of the superhero movie formula and what fans seem to want. Take for example Blue Beetle. I personally love this movie. It's actually one of my favorite DC movies. However, some people thought it was generic and repetitive of the standard superhero movie formula. For me, if the formula isn't broken, then don't fix it. Again, what matters to me is the characters are interesting and compelling so that I care about the story they're going through. And Blue Beetle had precisely that. Compelling characters with a compelling story. Yes, it's the standard superhero movie formula we've seen before, but it's done very well in my opinion, and its theme of family I found very engaging. Besides, every genre has their own specific standard formulas. The horror genre, for example, has its own standard formula that every movie in the genre follows, but I don't see a lot of people saying we're tired of the horror movie formula like they do with the superhero movie formula. It feels like some people aren't really looking for good stories or compelling characters, but for game changers, when not every superhero movie is going to be a game changer, nor do I expect every single one to be so. Now I want to talk about how the bar for superhero movies had been set extremely high after Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. Those two movies were absolutely fantastic, that it feels like fans and audiences want every superhero movie to be on that same level of awesomeness as those two films, and they're not happy with fine or just good superhero movies, especially when it comes to the new MCU movies. However, I feel people forget what and how long it took to get to those two movies, and how not every superhero movie before them were on that level of epicness. Which leads me to my next point. Back when he, Sean Chandler, John Flickinger, Cody Leach, and Chris from 3C Films had appeared at MegaCon Orlando, when they were discussing whether superhero movies are dying or not after Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania and Shazam! Fury of the Gods, Austin Berkey had said this.
I'm not tired of comic book movies. I'm tired of bad comic book movies. I'm tired of mediocre comic book movies. I want something fresh. That's why.
This quote goes back to how it looks like most people are looking for game changers as opposed to good stories or compelling characters. However, the piece from what Austin had said that stands out to me is how he's tired of bad and mediocre superhero movies. When I hear that, I feel people act as if superhero movies had this perfect track record prior to 2021, where every movie in the genre was critically acclaimed or raved about, which couldn't be further from the truth. Bad superhero movies and mediocre superhero movies have existed for decades. People would probably counter what I just said by arguing that, while yes, bad and mediocre superhero movies have always existed, in the past 3 years, they've outweighed any good or great ones we've gotten these past 3 years. Obviously, what is a good movie or show and what is a bad one is subjective. I'm an expert on this. There are quite a few superhero movies and shows I like or even love, but everyone else hates. and there are also quite a few that I don't like but everyone else loves. But if we just take into consideration the immediate general consensus of most people, pushing aside our personal opinions and feelings, an argument can be made that generally agreed upon bad superhero movies have always outweighed generally agreed upon good ones, and very few superhero movies have truly stood out to most people. It might not seem like that now because enough time has passed for some of these movies to become more appreciated, but when the modern wave of superhero movies began back in the late 1970s, early to mid 1980s, people didn't exactly consider this period to be a golden age for superhero movies. Superman 1 and 2 definitely changed cinema forever and were critically acclaimed, and rightfully so, as for me, those first two Superman movies are absolute masterpieces, but a lot of people did not like Superman 3 or 4. Nobody cared about either of the Swamp Thing movies, and I think most of us can agree that Supergirl and Howard the Duck were absolute embarrassments. And the late 1980s, early to mid 1990s was very similar. Tim Burton's Batman movies were definitely massive successes both financially and critically, and I'm personally happy they were because I love both of them, especially the first one, but at the same time, they did receive some backlash from a small but very vocal minority who criticized them for apparently being too dark or too inappropriate for kids. I respectfully disagree with these takes, but some people do have these criticisms. Besides, despite how popular Burton's Batman movies were, they were the only superhero movies of this time period to be widely beloved. People back then most likely would have laughed at you if you were to tell them that one day Marvel would have better movies than DC, because back in the 90s, Marvel was a laughingstock to most movie-going audiences. The Punisher from 1989 was boring and uninteresting, which I completely agree with, and I think I'm in the majority when I say the Fantastic Four from 1994 and Captain America from 1990 are some of the worst and most embarrassing superhero movies ever made. Outside of DC or Marvel, Super Mario Bros. From 1993 is labeled by many as one of the worst movies ever made, and while I personally love both Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from 1990 and Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie from 1995, and I know a lot of fellow Ninja Turtle and Power Rangers fans feel the same way I do, not many critics liked either of these movies. Ninja Turtles 1990 got similar backlash as Burton's Batman, and Power Rangers 1995 was criticized for its CGI and for being apparently too cheesy. Again, I respectfully disagree with these takes, but it is what it is. Meanwhile, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 and Turbo, a Power Rangers movie, had even less critics who liked them, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 was critically panned, and for me personally, that movie was, in fact, for the longest time, my pick for the worst superhero movie of all time, as I thought it was an abomination. Even amongst the DC movies of the 1990s, the ones that came out after Tim Burton's Batman movies were not liked at all. Steel is one of the most forgettable movies in existence, and lest we forget how many fans had for years harassed and ridiculed Joel Schumacher, may he rest in peace, claiming he killed Batman, as a lot of them didn't like Batman Forever, and pretty much all of them hated Batman and Robin so much that it was regarded as the death of superhero movies. See guys, we've been here before. And the 2000s era of superhero movies wasn't exactly a golden age for the genre in the public eye either. Yes, the first two X-Men films, the first two Raimi Spider-Man films, and the first two Nolan Batman films were very popular, not to mention this was around the time we also got The Incredibles, one of my favorite superhero and Pixar movies, but the rest weren't highly thought of by most people. Now I love the Tim Story Fantastic Four movies, and I think they're wildly overhated, but there's a reason why I describe them as such. Because a lot of people did not like either of these films. The same thing for Hulk from 2003 and The Punisher from 2004. I personally like those movies, but a lot of people don't. While the first two Blade movies were also popular with a lot of people, there aren't as many critics who like them as one might think. The first one has a 58% critics rating, while the second one has a 57%. Not to mention the fact that TMNT from 2007 and Superman Returns were considered major disappointments when they first dropped. A lot of people had made fun of Ghost Rider 1, Daredevil and Elektra, and most of us can agree that Blade Trinity and especially Catwoman are some of the worst superhero movies of all time. And lest we forget, Similar to Batman and Robin a decade prior, Spider-Man 3 and X-Men The Last Stand were outright hated when they first came out, and they too were seen as the death of superhero movies. And even when you get into the era in which the MCU first began with Phase 1, it wasn't constant critical success. Outside of the MCU, while Kick-Ass 1 was well received, a lot of people did not like Punisher Warzone, and many thought Ghost Rider 2 was just as bad as Ghost Rider 1. Green Lantern and X-Men Origins Wolverine were hated and ridiculed when they first dropped. Nolan fans probably won't want to admit this, but The Dark Knight Rises is one of the more divisive superhero films out there. Don't believe me? There were some critics who gave this film negative reviews, but some fans apparently sent death threats to them for doing so. Not to mention, this was around the time the Neo Saban era of Power Rangers had begun, and I don't recall many Power Ranger fans having the fondest opinion of Power Rangers Samurai Clash of the Red Rangers the movie back in the day. And while X-Men First Class and The Amazing Spider-Man were in fact well received and well regarded by critics, audiences and fans, at the same time, they too, similar to Tim Burton's Batman, received some backlash from vocal minorities. With First Class, some people point out the continuity errors from the original trilogy, and as for The Amazing Spider-Man, well, let's face it, most of the people who dislike it for existing instead of Raimi's Spider-Man 4, some not willing to even give it a proper chance. Most didn't like how it was different from the Raimi films. But hey, at least most of us can agree that the first Percy Jackson film was mediocre at best. And unless you're a die-hard fan, audiences didn't really care about any of the straight-to-home media or made-for-television animated superhero movies. And that's just what's going on outside of the MCU during Phase 1. Because when Phase 1 first dropped, it wasn't seen as this prodigy child that took the world by storm or anything special like that. Iron Man 1 definitely revolutionized superhero movies and was critically acclaimed. Again, rightfully so, as I think that movie's a masterpiece. But many people were very disappointed with Iron Man 2. Many were dismissive of Captain America the First Avenger, and for nearly an entire decade considered Thor 1 and The Incredible Hulk as some of the worst movies in the MCU. There's a reason why I consider Thor 1 and Captain America the First Avenger two of the most underrated MCU movies. It wasn't until The Avengers that brought these films together that audiences started to realize that there was something truly special about the MCU going on. The same goes for Phase 2 as well as all the other superhero movies outside of the MCU at the time. A lot of people were dismissive of Ant-Man 1, Kick-Ass 2 and The Wolverine. Nor did a lot of people like Iron Man 3, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from 2014. For the longest time, For the Dark World was a lot of people's least favorite MCU movie, and it still is to this day for some people. Power Rangers Super Mega Force The Legendary Battle was also outright hated and was seen as what almost killed the Power Rangers franchise. Percy Jackson 2 was thought to be just as bad as Percy Jackson 1. Avengers Age of Ultron disappointed quite a lot of people. Lest we forget that Fanforce came out during this period of superhero movies, and that's regarded by many people, myself included, as one of the top 10 worst superhero movies of all time. And whether Snyder fans like to admit it or not, Man of Steel is possibly the most divisive superhero movie in existence. The only superhero movies that were truly critically acclaimed during this time period were Captain America the Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy 1, X-Men Days of Future Past, and Big Hero 6. Now, in some ways, I can maybe understand some people's frustration with the current superhero movies, in particular MCU movies, because of how great Phase 3 was. I may have quite a few hot takes, but I believe most will agree with me that Phase 3 is the best phase of the MCU so far, and was absolutely fantastic. Captain America Civil War, Spider-Man Homecoming, Thor Ragnarok, Black Panther, Avengers Infinity War, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Captain Marvel, Avengers Endgame, and Spider-Man Far From Home all rank among some of my top 20 MCU movies and top 30 favorite superhero movies, and they were talked about quite a lot. However, even some of these movies received some backlash from annoying vocal minorities. I don't want to spend too much time ranting on the likes of High Top Films and Geeks and Gamers, but Captain Marvel got some backlash, such as fake reviews, which is evident due to the movie getting way more audience reviews within a few hours of its release than Infinity War in an entire year, because some people, or should I say, heartless bullies, were extremely ill-bent on vilifying Brie Larson. Spider-Man Homecoming and Far From Home for, well, like The Amazing Spider-Man, for existing instead of Raimi's Spider-Man 4, or for not being like the Raimi films. Some people were also dismissive of Ant-Man and the Wasp, and even Doctor Strange 1 in some cases, and criticized Thor Ragnarok for being too comedic, even though they had previously complained about Thor the Dark World being too serious. And not many people had high opinions of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 when it first dropped. Literally only in the past couple of months have you suddenly seen YouTubers rank Volume 2 in their top 10 or even top 5 favorite MCU movies, when before, at best, it would have been ranked somewhere in the middle. And then you get into all the other superhero movies outside of the MCU during Phase 3. It was very hit or miss. While Deadpool 1 and Logan were critical successes, as were Incredibles 2 and Into the Spider-Verse, there were quite a few people who were dismissive of Deadpool 2. No one really cared about the New Mutants, and a lot of people really didn't like X-Men Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix, with this being the ultimate downfall of the Fox X-Men movies. People had mixed feelings for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Out of the Shadows, and Venom 1 and Power Rangers from 2017 rank among some of the most polarizing superhero movies ever made. While Sonic the Hedgehog was well received, and rightfully so, as I, alongside many other fellow Sonic fans, loved it so much, it only has a 63% critics rating on Rotten Tomatoes, the same critics rating of Spider-Man 3. And that's not even getting into the rocky track record DC had during this period. Now, the DCEU did get some well-received movies during this time, such as Shazam 1 and Wonder Woman 1, but I don't recall too many people being crazy about Aquaman 1. Whether Snyder fans like to admit it or not, Batman v Superman was critically panned and was regarded as one of the lowest lows of the superhero movie genre, which I personally completely agree with, as it was an absolute dumpster fire for me. Birds of Prey was extremely divisive, and Justice League disappointed a lot of people. Not to mention, while Joker was better received than a lot of DC's 2010 movies, there were quite a few people who weren't fans of it, making it too very divisive. I personally like it, but I'm not in love with it like a lot of people are. And Wonder Woman 1984 and Suicide Squad from 2016 are considered by many as some of the worst movies in the DCEU, which for me is saying a lot since I feel the DCEU has more misses than hits in its resume. So, looking back at the immediate responses to the majority of these superhero movies from the previous decades, the 2020s era is not really that different from previous decades. So I don't know why people are acting as if the superhero movie genre, and the MCU in particular, is in its last days. Each decade has given us some of the best superhero movies of all time, but also some of the worst superhero movies of all time, and quite a few in the middle. I think people don't realize this because all these superhero movies from the 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, and 2010s have been given enough time to pass to be re-evaluated, appreciated more, or even develop their own cult followings, from Punisher Warzone to Ninja Turtles 2014 to Power Rangers 2017. But I assume the same will happen for a lot of the 2020 superhero movies like Quantumania and Fury of the Gods, where after some time people might come around to my way of thinking. Now look, I'm not acting as if I've liked every single superhero movie since 2021, because I haven't. Zack Snyder's Justice League and Venom Let There Be Carnage are some of my least favorite superhero movies. I wasn't a fan of Black Adam either, and I think I'm on the same page as everybody else when I say Morbius was awful. Plus, Werewolf by Night is my least favorite MCU movie. But what about everything else? Even though Werewolf by Night is in fact my least favorite MCU movie, and I didn't love Suicide Squad from 2021, they're still decent movies. Eternals is also another one of my bottom 5 MCU movies, but I do think it's at the very least good, and I have grown to appreciate it a bit more as time has gone on. I also quite liked the Super Mario Bros. Movie and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Heck, I'm one of the few people who prefers the second Doctor Strange over the first. I also really liked the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. I thought they were very enjoyable. Surprisingly, for me, The Flash and Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles the movie turned out to be okay. I don't love either of them, but I didn't hate either of them like I thought I would. They ended up being okay, middle-of-the-road superhero movies. And now for all the ones that I think are great, regardless of whether people agree with me or not. Black Widow, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, Spider-Man No Way Home, The Batman, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Thor Love and Thunder, Black Panther Wakanda Forever, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, Shazam Fury of the Gods, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Once and Always, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and Blue Beetle. So I personally have enjoyed to loved quite a lot of the superhero movies from this decade, just like the previous decade. And I guess there was Across the Spider-Verse, if you like that, which is fine if you do. I didn't, but I'm still going to give Beyond the Spider-Verse a fair shot, even if I didn't enjoy the first two Spider-Verse movies. Maybe they can rebound from them for me. And the same goes for all the other superhero movies coming out in the next 2 years. Even though I have a very low opinion of the Sony Venomverse, as I like to call it, surely Venom 3 can't be worse than the first two Venom films. Same with Madam Web and Kraven the Hunter. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the multiverse saga of the MCU, whether you're talking about Deadpool 3, The Thunderbolts, Captain America Brave New World, Spider-Man 4, 5, Shang-Chi 2, Fantastic Four, and of course, Avengers the Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars, as well as the X-Men's eventual rival to the MCU. And I'm personally hoping we'll get an Ant-Man 4, Black Panther 3, and Captain Marvel 3. And I think after Guardians 3, the Holiday Special and Blue Beetle, I'm excited for James Gunn's DCU, especially Superman Legacy, which I'm confident I'll enjoy more than I ever did Man of Steel or Batman v Superman, as well as Batman the Brave and the Bold and Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow. I'm really excited for those two, Supergirl in particular. The same goes for the Batman Part 2. Hopefully we'll also get a follow-up to Blue Beetle and a Batgirl movie. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is my most anticipated superhero movie of 2024, and I truly believe the future is looking bright for Sonic's cinematic universe. After Once and Always, all the more do I think the Power Rangers franchise is in good hands at Hasbro, and I'm eager to see what the rebooted Power Rangers universe has to offer, hoping it will be great. And after Mutant Mayhem, I'm looking forward to the sequel, and I think I'm looking forward for what's to come for the Ninja Turtles. Something I haven't really been able to say with much enthusiasm for a while outside of the IDW Ninja Turtles comics, the only Ninja Turtles media I've loved of the 2010s. In fact, I would argue that it's the YouTube critics genre that might be losing its mojo, let's say. I really hate to sound rude, I really do, but I personally feel some movie and TV critics on YouTube have maybe become a bit too impressed with themselves. I hope I don't become like that one day. If I do, let me know so that I can stop myself. Not all of them, mind you, as I feel Ren Geekness, Zach Pope, Anthony A. Perez, Chris from Filmstock, as well as his girlfriend Cam, are all guys I feel are still very optimistic and reliable people, and that you can take their reviews seriously. You and I don't have to agree with every opinion they have or take their word as gospel, but I feel they're the most respectable YouTube critics and have relatively consistent standards, and even if they're giving negative reviews, they're probably the most professional and civilized about it. Other positive YouTubers I'd recommend are Matty Crescent Moon, Pillar of Garbage, Deoxy360, Sam Procrastinates, The Sixth Ranger, Brent Beers, Film Speak, Superheroes 101, Will Wolf, Matter Scout, Mighty Morphin Conspiracy Theories, Chalmix, Colton OG Burn, Christian Hanna from the HannaCast, Turf Nation, pretty much the entire Fandom Initiative, and Speed Supersonic. And as much as I miss Chris Stuckman's Hilariosity reviews, I respect, praise, and support his decision to only review movies and shows he likes in order to spread more positivity on YouTube. Unfortunately, I feel some other YouTube critics have become maybe more overly negative and have become no longer fun to watch, to the point where I've gone as far as to unsubscribe from some of them because I could no longer take their overly negative attitude or them tearing apart some projects and using some hyperbolic and overly exaggerated language to describe them. Not to mention, I feel some YouTubers have become very hypocritical. For example, some people have claimed movies like Thor Love and Thunder undermine their dramatic and serious moments with jokes, yet some of these same people litter their ranking videos and reviews with cheesy jokes, ant puns, creepy and weird intros, 4 puns, and goofy comedy sketches that breaks the seriousness of their reviews. I'm fine with this stuff, I really am. But don't criticize movies and shows for doing the same thing you're doing. Some have even criticized Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Once and Always, and all of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers that isn't the 2017 movie, claiming it was too cheesy to take seriously, even though some of these same people have either the first or the second Raimi Spider-Man movie in their top 5 favorite superhero movies ever, when I could argue that the Raimi Spider-Man movies, while for me range from good to okay, were a lot cheesier, sillier, and campier than Mighty Morphin Power Rangers could ever hope to be. Or do those first 3 Spider-Man movies get a pass in that regard because Sam Raimi seems to be a favorite director of a lot of people? As well as this, you could basically make a drinking game of the number of times each of these critics say, "I grew up with," or "they don't make movies or shows like this anymore." And if the biggest problem people have for Thor Love and Thunder is screaming goats and split kicks, or their biggest problem for Black Widow is its third act, or for Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania is the CGI, which I personally didn't think was bad except for MODOK, but that doesn't take away from me loving the movie, or for Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Once and Always is that Jason David Frank, may he rest in peace, didn't return as Tommy in it, then maybe these YouTube critics aren't good or reliable critics after all. And those are just the ones who aren't racist or sexist grifters. Don't get me started on the channels that are and go on claiming Hollywood has gone woke or is bringing in identity politics, because A, I don't believe anything they say, and B, my response to them is,
nobody cares. Nobody cares.
When I had started, I initially wanted to do movie reviews, but has been kind of put off by the current state of movie critics. This is why I decided to mainly focus on rankings and video essays, such as this one. Sure, my video on The Spectacular Spider-Man was more me criticizing the show as opposed to praising something, but that was a one-off video centered solely on something I don't like because I wanted to get my thoughts of the show off my chest. My video on Miles Morales and why I don't like him was merged with me simultaneously talking about why I love Rocky, Adam and Aisha into a singular video. I'm hoping to focus on video essays in the future that are mostly positive, like this one. Now, regardless of what you think of Brie Larson, at least she's using her YouTube channel to spread positivity, so I truly appreciate and praise her for doing so. Same with Austin St. John and Walter Jones at Fanword, as well as Catherine Sutherland and Nakia Burris at Power Rangers Playback, and Michael Rosenbaum at Inside of You. And if David Yost, Tom Holland, Steve Cardenas, Zendaya, Karen Ashley, Haley Steinfeld, Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone, Simu Liu, etc. have their own channels where they talk to fans, let me know so that I can go and support them too. Now, possibly the most common complaint about the current era of superhero movies is that there are too many superhero movies coming out each year, leading to oversaturation. Now, I understand this criticism. It can be overwhelming. However, I have a question for you. How many superheroes and superhero teams exist? Hundreds, thousands, maybe even billions. And that's just talking about Western superheroes. Imagine if I were to include tokusatsu superheroes from the East, like Kamen Rider or Super Sentai. That would add to the already giant pile of superheroes. And there are still some who have yet to get their own movies, such as Jessica Drew's Spider-Woman and Barbara Gordon's Batgirl. And in terms of superhero teams, we still haven't gotten a Teen Titans movie or a Young Avengers movie, but hopefully we'll get them along the line. Plus, my dad had grown up with the Christopher Reeve Superman movies and the Tim Burton Batman movies, and while he likes superheroes, he wishes he could be more into them, and said had more superhero movies come out during his time, he would have been more into them, and actually believes we're extremely lucky to be getting all of these different superhero movies in our youths. I also want to say this. Every new superhero movie is going to be someone's first, so what might be generic and repetitive to one might be unique and mind-blowing to another. For some people, The Amazing Spider-Man was generic and repetitive of the origin story that was already told in Spider-Man 1, but for some others, it was the first time they were experiencing Spider-Man's origin, and for some people like me, it took an origin that had already been told on the big screen before, and improved on it so that I find myself more emotionally invested in the Amazing Spider-Man's version of the origin. For a movie like Blue Beetle, some people think it's generic, while others would find it mind-blowing, and I found it emotionally investing and with a great and compelling protagonist and great supporting characters. So, I hope I was able to play decent devil's advocate and tell you why I believe superhero movies are not dying and why I still think we're getting good superhero movies, but that's just my personal opinion. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Do you agree with me that superhero movies are not dying, or do you believe differently? And if you like this video, leave a like, subscribe for more if you like my content. I talk Marvel, Ninja Turtles, Sonic the Hedgehog, Power Rangers, Percy Jackson, sometimes DC and Super Mario. So if anything is like that is up your alley, this is the place for you. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll be back hopefully really soon, and I'll see you next time. But until then, trust your own judgment. Sodium285 out.
If the world chooses to become my enemy, I will fight like I always have.